Welcome. I'm just checking you're all here. I'm Jackie Bagnall. I am the Programme Director of the full-time MBA here at Exeter. We would like to extend a very warm welcome to the Leading Edge 2021. This is the second in our speaker series brought to you from the Exeter MBA at the University of Exeter Business School. Home to the Exeter Centre for Leadership, whose members conduct distinctive and high-quality research in leadership and governance. The Centre for Leadership offers programmes at undergraduate, postgraduate and executive MBA levels. Our students work in partnership with a wide range of organisations looking at environmental, social and governance issues. Focused on leadership for a better world, we launched this year's Leading Edge series in September and have enjoyed sessions with Mary Portas, Mary Ann Seagard and John Amici. Today we are delighted to welcome you back for what will be another thought-provoking afternoon. I'm delighted to introduce you to Kira Eastle, Professor of Practice here at Exeter. Kira is responsible for the design and the curation of the Leading Edge series, and she will tell you more about our speaker for this afternoon. Welcome.
Thanks, Jackie, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth and the last in our 2021 series of the Leading Edge, a series of talks brought to you by the Exeter MBA, and we're delighted you can join us this afternoon for our session with Dr Darren Henley OBE, Chief Exec of Arts Council England. Now, as those of you who've joined us before will know, this series is a space where leaders have the chance to engage with the ideas at the forefront of positive change in business and society, and our carefully chosen speakers have something fresh and challenging to offer, so that all of you, our MBA students, our alumni, our academic and professional services staff and our local business community can gain new perspectives and inspiration for creating a better future. This year we've introduced the Leading Edge conversation session, so you can stay on after the speaker and talk to one another and engage with the ideas, and we hope that you'll stay on after today. Before I introduce Darren properly, just an outline of how the session this afternoon will work and how you can get involved. Jackie and I will be in conversation with Darren for about 35 or 40 minutes, and we'll then open up to your questions. So do put questions in for Darren as we go along, and we'll pick them up a little bit later in the session. Feel free to leave your cameras on. We're going to introduce this from Leading Edge from now on. John Amici encouraged us last time to keep our cameras on. So if you feel bold, do please put your cameras on. It's really nice to see familiar faces. So I'm really delighted to introduce Dr. Darren Henley OBE. Darren is Chief Executive of Arts Council England. His boardroom experience spans the arts, media, education, charity and government, and he led Classic FM for 15 years before joining the Arts Council in 2015. Darren is the author of 2 independent government reviews into music and cultural education, and he received the British Academy's President's Medal for his contributions to music education, music research and the arts. A certified coach, Darren has a doctorate exploring the role of the outsider as an agent for change, master's degrees in management and in history of art, postgraduate certificates in coaching and behavioural change, and in applied positive psychology. And if that wasn't enough, a degree in politics. Darren's latest book, The Arts Dividend, Why Investment in Culture Pays, highlights how public investment in art, artists, arts organisations, museums and libraries helps to create happier lives in villages, towns and cities across England. Now, I've had the great pleasure of getting to know Darren over the past 4 years as a member of the National Council of Arts Council England, and I've seen up close how Darren's leadership of Arts Council during a very challenging time has really made a difference to ensuring that creative and cultural activities are still available to all within our local communities. So Darren, welcome to the Leading Edge this afternoon, and really nice that we can have you with us this afternoon for what we hope will be quite an enjoyable and informal session this afternoon.
Thank you, Kira, for that welcome, and thank you, Jackie, as well. It's great to be here.
Lovely. So if that's okay, I'm going to kick us off. Darren, in this series, we have looked at the big issues facing all of us as leaders, and in our organisations and in our wider communities. Issues and challenges around responsible leadership, digital transformation, and environmental sustainability. I wondered if you could tell us what role you think the arts and culture can, and often does, play in our national and civic life, and how you see the future in terms of the place that arts and culture can play in revitalising our high streets and our communities.
It's a very wide question, so I try and take it apart a little bit and answer sort of in chunks, if that's okay. I think one of the really interesting things that we've seen through the last 20 or so months during the pandemic is what happens when our entire arts and cultural infrastructure was forced to shut down. I don't think any of us had ever imagined what that would be like. And, you talk about places there, and isn't it interesting what our places have been like when the library and the theatre and the museum and the music venue haven't been trading, haven't been able to operate, and that's been taken away from us. And I think, I speak for myself on this, but I know I speak for lots of people, and not just people who work in the arts, that to the extent to which people really miss that. It's a vital part of our lives. And, Exeter is a great place. It's a great example of a city where, people come there to study, they come there to work, and they live there, and they were born there. And actually the infrastructure within the city is really, really important. And for us, I always mention Kareem, the chief executive of the council, because he, I know, is not only chief executive of the council, but he's director of growth. And I remember very clearly going to Exeter and him saying to me that a big part of his job was to see, for people to see the city through being a place that was about growth. And when he brought people in to talk to the potential inward investors, he took them first of all to the museum, because that was at the cultural heart of the city. And I see that a lot as I go around the country. Chief executives and leaders of local authorities are talking a lot about having cultural spaces. It could be a library, it could be a museum, it could be some sort of performance space or an arts centre at the heart of what they wanted. Maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago, they might have wanted a department store and then some chains of restaurants around it. They don't want that anymore. They want that cultural hub. They then want local boutique sort of coffee and food offers, and then smaller shops with local makers, things that you can't get on the internet, things that are very much of their place. And that's how people are starting to reimagine high streets, with offices in there now and more residential in there too. But culture is absolutely the heart of that. Artists are at the heart of that. Artists make a place, they can define a place, and they can do things that those of us who aren't artists can't do. They can dream and they can imagine and they can innovate. And so for me, those places that have got culture at their heart are the most exciting places in the country.
Thanks, Darren. I could see Camilla from RAM on the call, and she's nodding furiously as you talk about the role of the museum in the city and what an important...
Gerald the giraffe. I remember I've had my photo taken with Gerald, and he's an important part of my cultural memory of the country. I think of Exeter, I think of Gerald.
Well, that's just made Camilla's day, I'm sure. But so just you touched there on the role of the Arts Council during the pandemic, but lots of people on the call won't really appreciate what the Arts Council's had to do during this period. And I just wonder if you could just sketch out for us what has been the role of the Arts Council during this time. How is it different from Arts Council's normal role? And also a sort of separate question but linked to it is what have you learned about leadership during that time as a result of Arts Council's changing role and what you've seen in the arts sector?
I think the first thing to say is that obviously across COVID, it has affected so many people inside and outside the arts sector, and really, some terrible things have happened to people's lives, and I really acknowledge that. And for those people who've had really challenging health situations, and for their friends and families in the same way as well, it's been really difficult. And I think we've all learned how, when change of that magnitudes is forced on you, we see sort of almost a powerlessness of human beings in that. Yet at the same time, I think that people have been very powerful in that sense of community and coming together. At the Arts Council, many of the organisations we work with literally had their doors shut down overnight when we first went into lockdown. And that was incredibly challenging. However good a business you are, however good your governance, nobody planned for that to happen universally on one day, and all of your income streams literally being cut off overnight. And so that was really, really tough. And it's been very, very tough, obviously, within the creative industries. We rely a lot on freelancers and freelance creative practitioners. That's a really important part of what we do. So it's been very, very tough for them as well. in terms of the organisations we work with, there was an emergency. It really was. And so for us at the Arts Council, we very, very quickly, within a few days, used a lot of our reserves to find ways of putting money into an emergency response fund. So that was for individuals. It was also for organisations that we don't regularly fund, and also for those organisations, what we call our national portfolio organisations, that we do regularly fund. We varied a lot of the terms and conditions of our funding agreements. Clearly, in normal times, you get public money to provide art or creative output. Clearly, that wasn't going to happen. But we still needed those organisations to be able to employ people to be able to pay the bills. And so that was something that really just bought a bit of time. Then the government worked on the Cultural Recovery Fund, which we work with them. And whatever your politics, this is factually correct to say this is the largest injection of cash into the creative industries, into the culture, into the arts in this country in history. So totaling £2 billion across the UK. Obviously, given the size of England, and that the largest part of that money coming to England, and the largest part of that English money coming through the Arts Council. So, to give you an example, in the 2019 to 2020 financial year, our turnover at the Arts Council was roughly about 750 million. It was 1.75 billion the following year. So, and there's still more money coming through in this financial year as it's phased in. And so we were very much working to ensure that the infrastructure of our sector, and our sector, our arts organisations of one sort or another, museums, libraries, that they could all survive, and that was a big thing. So survival was very, very important there, because actually once you lose that, it's very hard to put it back into place again. And also for people in the creative sector who are employed within this, most of their employment is coming from these institutions. So if those institutions go, not only do those people who are on the full-time staff have a challenge in terms of their roles, but also freelancers as well. So it was a very, very, and remains a very difficult ecology. I mean, one of the things I think we've all seen with this pandemic is its ability to change and to shift its shape and to surprise us on occasions. And so, we work with what we know at any given time, but there's always going to be a level of uncertainty there and a level of ambiguity, and we've had to be fast and responsive to that, and to do what's best for everyone. And I hope also to try to operate as a public funder that is absolutely rigorous in terms of upholding all the rules and regulations and ideals that you would see around investing public money, but at the same time doing it in a way that's thoughtful and kind and understanding to the people and the organisations that we're dealing with. And why do we do that? In the end, we do that because of the end audiences and the end participants. It's for them that we're doing that, and it's for them that it justifies the investment of taxpayers' money and National Lottery players' money into the arts, into culture, into museums, into libraries every day.
Sorry, I think I did ask you a very long question. So could you say something about leadership then, in terms of what you've learned either about your own leadership, that of your colleagues, and what you've seen in the sector?
Yeah, it's very interesting in the arts sector. I think we have some of the most entrepreneurial individuals. I mean, it would be very easy for people to create some sort of stereotype where they think it's just a series of creative people and that's all they do. Actually, that's completely wrong. I work with some very, very intelligent leaders who are working in very fast-moving, very creatively driven organisations. They're great leaders of people. They're working in place. They are creating brands that actually go out and represent the United Kingdom on the world stage day in, day out. And I think every leader of every organisation, whether inside our sector or in any other, has really been tested over the last getting on for 2 years now. They've had to do things that they weren't in their experience set before. They might have done some of the things, but so many of them came together at the same time. And I think some of the things that also were happening in society around that time. So the issues from George Floyd's murder and through Black Lives Matter was something that's very important that we addressed and we continue to address. People's mental health and well-being, I think it's something that's really, really important, and having that conversation more openly and more often is really important for leaders, I think, at the moment. I'm not sure that all leaders felt comfortable about doing that maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but I think it's an absolute necessity. And perhaps it was that shared sense of experience that's happening to everybody all at the same time that has made that slightly more easy. But I think, relentless over communication to people is really, really important if you're a leader. I think it's really, really important that you build individual relationships. I believe very strongly we have, between 500 and 600 people working for our organisation. They're all individuals. They're not just one lump of the same person. And I think one of the things through the pandemic is different people at different times face different challenges, whether that be something happening with care responsibilities for children or for older relatives, or whether they got sick, or very sadly, deaths in their family, or their partner became sick, or whatever. And some people with long COVID as well. So it's not even been something that can be defined over a short period of time, and how this particular disease or its infections can change people so differently. And I think so as a leader, it's always going to be about people for me. I think you've got to think about the people, and so that's challenging because it's been very constant as well, and I don't think it's been easy. But I've met and seen some fantastic people doing fantastic jobs right across the cultural sector.
Thank you. I'm struck by a few things you've said there, Darren, and I want to draw you towards the whole idea of human flourishing, because you talked about human beings, and what really strikes me is we have people on the call today from around the world. The Exeter full-time MBA is predominantly international, and there's at least 25 years of alumni that stay connected, and yes, they look back fondly at their time of Exeter, but they're also in all of these multifaceted different cultures. And I wonder about your thoughts around the whole thing about culture and identity and sense of place and who we are, and how you see the investment in culture as part of that.
Well, I'm really glad you asked me this question, because I've become increasingly obsessed with happiness. Actually, I think that happiness is really, really important. And a lot of business schools, and maybe you do this, you encourage people to sort of get their three-word brand for themselves, or what's big about what they do. And so for me, the thing that gets me up in the morning is creating happier lives. So creating happier lives is actually an end goal. I believe is something that's really, really important. I actually think it's something I share with probably virtually everybody else who works at the Arts Council, actually, whoever they are, whether they're a relationship manager working with artists and arts organisations, or they're sitting in our investment centre processing grant applications. Actually, the job that they do every day is actually doing something better for other human beings. And I think I've become very, very interested, as Kira said in the introduction. I've just finished doing a degree in applied positive psychology, which is the science of what makes life worth living. So if you look at the history of psychology, it was a sort of medical deficit model in the last century, so before the turn of the century. So if you like, getting people from -10 back to 0 again. And actually, there was a guy called Martin Seligman who and another guy who just died called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who they kind of developed this idea of positive psychology, which was saying, well, actually, we could use the same tools to get you from 0 to +10. And that's interesting. And wouldn't it be better if we were all flourishing? So this idea of flourishing, I talk a lot about happiness because I think that's what real people say. Some people, particularly, I notice in Britain, we're a bit uncomfortable with talking about happiness. So we like to talk about well-being. That's okay. We can call it well-being. It doesn't really matter about the label for it. But in the end, I think if you go and sit in the pub or a coffee shop, you'd be talking, am I happy? Am I sad? Not my well-being has gone up by 2 notches or something like that. I think, that's what real people say. But being happy, and also fascinatingly, what you can do within a work environment often doesn't cost any money. There's some very simple things that you can do around gratitude, around setting goals, around understanding and identifying people's strengths, and then actually coaching them and helping them to build those strengths, again, rather than concentrating on the deficit model. So often, if you think of when you have an end of year review, your boss says to you, actually, you've done quite well on these things, let's ignore those, let's concentrate on these 2 things that you haven't done so well on. And you think, well, actually, I'm not very good at those things. She or he who lives 2 desks along from me, they're really good at those things. So why don't you coach them a bit more to be better on those, and coach me to be a bit better on the things I'm good at? And I think that's really, really interesting. So the idea of positive psychology, alongside coaching, which again, at the Arts Council, we've invested in all of our top team becoming certified coaches, and that's really, really important for us, and changing the quality of the conversation that leaders have within the organisation to be much more coaching led. And I don't mean that you have to sit down with everybody and have a formal coaching session every time. I mean, what you've got in your sort of knapsack as a leader are the things you can pull out at different times. Is you've got that coaching skill set. And for me, coaching is an attitudinal thing. It's a way of being. It's not just a way of doing. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of asking questions. It's a way of building relationships with people. And the other thing which I've become more interested in alongside coaching and positive psychology is looking at mindfulness, which I think is the third part. And I think for creating happier lives, for creating happier workplaces, for us all being happier human beings, if you can bring together the elements of coaching, positive psychology, and mindfulness, I think you're really onto something.
Kira, do you mind if I just pick up on things?
Go for it, Jackie.
This is the thing when you're in the flow of a question. So part of that, one of the things that really struck me also earlier, coupled with what you've just said, is this notion of the artisan and this expression of one's own creativity through the work that you do. And we're beginning to see a lot more, whether it's generationally or whether it's opportunity, about people and their side hustles. So this thing I do on the side, which is my expression of who I really am, it's my resilience. So you talked about well-being and mindfulness. It's my resilience to get me through the day-to-day slog of my work. And we've seen the great resignation, and all over the press and the HR literature is about people quitting work. So I just wondered, this thing about either you've got creativity and an expression of self, or you've got the drudgery of work, linked back to your point in terms of dividends around the future of educating young people and what work and society are going to need in the future. If you have any ideas about bringing these two things together.
I'm always really interested. It's fascinating that quite often we as human beings like to reduce things to a series of binary either ors, and it's either creativity or it's drudgery. And I'm quite interested in and instead of either or, and maybe that's being a little bit greedy about some of these things. But I don't think that it necessarily needs to be that workplaces should be like that. I mean, many of them are, and many people have suffered from that. But actually, I think as leaders, you can work with your team to create a workplace that actually is interesting, is exciting, is creative. And I think there are always different and new ways of doing things. There's always, if we didn't have creativity, we would sort of be, if you think that the whole concept of creativity was removed from our lives, like flip a switch like that and tomorrow it's gone and you can't, so we would essentially be on this hamster wheel going round and round and round, and all we'd be able to do was draw on what we had today, because that's there in front of us right now, or what we'd done in the past, and nothing else. We'd never be able to invent anything to cope with any of the challenges. Nothing would ever develop on. There would be no progress. It would be an awful world to live in. And I think, I worry that for some people that can be how their working lives could be characterized, and they're on that hamster wheel. And so I think, that there's a very good book called One Life, and I will remember the author. I think it's Albeck, Albaek, I think, but it's called One Life, and which is really interesting, which is talking about meaningfulness is one of the things he talks about, having meaning in your life as well. And I think it again ties in a lot to positive psychology. Happy people tend to have goals. They're not unrealistic goals. They're sometimes not very big goals, but they're things that they have in their life that they would say, I'm going to achieve this, I'm going to work at it. And there's a lot of very interesting things about when we have that, when you write it down at the beginning of the year and say, here's my goals, or even better, write it down halfway through the year instead of the beginning of the year. So it's not like a New Year's resolution. And, think in a year's time, I'm going to look at this. And it's funny how your brain, it's a little bit like if you want to go and buy a green car, suddenly you realize there are thousands of green cars on the road that you've never seen before. I was looking for the other day to buy a new laptop. I suddenly realized every newspaper has pages of laptop adverts. I bought my laptop now. I haven't seen another laptop advert in my mind. It's the same thing, that your brain does take you towards those things. And I think that's really interesting. So, gratitude is really being grateful for what you've got. Some very interesting tools there. Just, having taken that moment to think, what have I achieved today? Because so often as individuals, we can be quite negative about these things. And I think within education, I'm fascinated because I think this is where we can start fusing things together. And I think that's where true creativity comes. Different people with different backgrounds, different life experiences, different work journeys coming together. In a business school, when you do a creative industries MBA, I make no value judgment on this, but what tends to happen is you get the standard MBA and they bolt in one module at the bottom, which is the creative industries module. And that's virtually every business school. I maybe different extra, but that's often what happens. Wouldn't it be interesting if we flipped that on the head? Wouldn't it be interesting if we said, let's have an MFA for business. Let's get the creative, let's get the art school to design it using all the ballast and knowledge of the business school. But let's have artists design, and how would it be delivered differently with all of the rigor? Because you still need to be able to read accounts, you still need to know about strategy and all those sorts of things. But what would it be like if there were artists involved in that? And it was a much more creative journey that everybody went on, rather than one that was maybe slightly more working within tougher parameters. So I think all of those things could be really, really exciting about how we have the next generation and how we bring them into the fore. The other thing I always say, particularly when you're working with undergraduates, is these are the people who are going to invent tomorrow. They really are, and they have all of that power. It's not going to be people of my age who are going to do that now. Our job is to enable them to get to the place where they can do the things and think the things with their background and their experience that we simply don't have the knowledge or experience to do. And that's really exciting. That's why I always think I'm very jealous of people who work in universities. I think you have the opportunity to do that, to see that actually forming in front of your eyes.
Thanks, Darren. And I know that Jackie will come back to you about the creative MBA in a moment. But perhaps if I can just go back to the issue around health and well-being or happiness, whatever we want to call it. But I was very struck in rereading your book over the weekend, some of the stuff that you talk about in terms of the value and contribution of arts to properly kind of healthier lives. And you talk about falls prevention and dance as one example of actually the real contribution that the arts can play in terms of kind of healthier outcomes. I just wondered if you could give us a couple of examples of where you've seen that, arts in health settings where it's really made a difference, but also perhaps tell us a bit about how do we make some of that stuff stick with policymakers for them to really understand it in a very complex environment and an environment that's under huge pressure in terms of the NHS. How do we make the case for those sorts of interventions?
No, I think you're absolutely right. It is complex. I think if you were to really, the very simple answer would be data, data, data. I think you need to get good quality data. And I think one of the things that we have to make sure that we don't do as an arts sector is to overclaim. We haven't got data that shows we can make everything better. That clearly isn't the case. However, there is, and you gave a very good example there in terms of the over 75s dancing and then having a greater lower body strength means they don't fall so often. That's a lot better for their quality of life, if they don't fall over, because when you're over 75 and you fall over, if you break a bone, it takes a long time to heal, if it ever heals, and can be really problematic. It means that you're then spending more time in hospital. That's let's start from the person point of view. It's not great for them, but it's also not great if they're spending a long time in hospital beds. That's not great for their quality of life. It also is expensive for the NHS. So actually, if you can invest in doing something with them that they enjoy, that they find a pleasurable community experience, and it's actually helping them to stay well for longer, that's really powerful. So I suppose we also need to look at it from the point of view of clinical commissioners, because it's their money that we would be spending in this way. So, does it stop you from getting sick? Does it get you better quicker than a pill? Is it better for you than a pill? And we should be very honest about that. And one of the things we maybe, you'll know this from an academic world, is, we have to have proper, good research that stands up. It's no good being kind and saying, oh well, we just gave it to the control group anyway, because that's absolutely, as we know, stop research from being valid. So we need to get that proper rigorous research. We're working a lot now, and I think it's a growth area, we're working a lot in social prescribing, and this is a really interesting area. So we're seeing a lot of GPs working on that. There is government support and Department of Health support on this, and we co-fund and co-set up with the Department of Health the National Academy of Social Prescribing, which is really doing some excellent work and excellent thinking on this. And again, that's about proving the point. And we have social prescribers now out in the community and community health settings, making a real difference there. It can work in libraries. Actually prescribing a set of books for people to do. It could be on a solo activity. It could be as part of a reading group. That's really powerful. I know if you go to Liverpool Library and you look inside the right-hand side of the door, there's a whole social prescribing set of books literally right inside the door. It can work fascinating work I've seen in museums. I've seen some museums where they've worked out that, for example, 70 plus men were not engaging with the museum, so they got them in as a group. Many of them were widowers, and they were living on their own, and they were finding life really tough, but they got them into a group. They got them into the stores, and they said, right, you can just curate anything you want from these stores. And they did some lovely things that went back to their professional lives or the geography of the place, and they were able to talk about it and create a fantastic exhibition there. So loneliness actually is a really interesting thing. And if we look at the general happiness of the country, for countries where people are more lonely tend to be unhappier, and so actually bringing people together in that sense of community around that part of well-being is really important too.
Thank you. Good to see some questions coming in over the chat. So we'll just pursue this conversation, this dialogue for another 5 minutes or so, and then we'll move to these questions because we've got some really great things coming in. Diversity and inclusion, Darren, you spoke briefly about Black Lives Matter. How is the arts and culture sector rising to the challenge of being more diverse, inclusive and relevant? And what should all leaders be doing right now to develop increased diversity and more inclusive environments within their organisations?
I mean, unambiguously, we have to get to a position where the arts sector, the cultural sector, us as an organisation, looks and feels like England in the 21st century, and that, to be truly representative of that, whether that's in terms of people's ethnicity, disability, the people's socioeconomic background. All of these measures, geography, are really, really important. And some of those measures we'll see, and some of them, you can actually physically see them. Some of them will be things we need to work harder on behind the scenes as well. But it's really, really important that we have people, I think, making decisions at all levels. And I talk a lot about gatekeepers, and I think those gatekeepers have to be representative. So, we need to see that playing out in front of us. We also need to look at the way that money is invested to make sure that there's fairness and opportunity there. And I think, fairness and opportunity as words to put at the heart of this are really good things to hold on to. It is unfair. Anything that isn't representative, that doesn't give people opportunity, is unfair, and we shouldn't be seeing that. We are investing public money, so everyone pays their taxes, everyone plays the national lottery. It's really important that money benefits people from all backgrounds and all communities, and that they can see a journey working in our world, but also that they're there as part of audiences in our world as well. And so that we're investing in creative content and output that is relevant. We're also valuing all sorts of people's different creative content and output. There's no one sort of art that is acceptable, or creativity that's acceptable, or content that's acceptable. It's got to be reflective of all sorts, and we've got to continually challenge ourselves on that, and making sure that we widen it out as much as possible, so that that public money is being invested in things that is for the benefit of the whole public.
Yeah, you made a point earlier about fusing creativity, and there's something about the curation, isn't there? It's about holding the curation to account so that across the board we have this diversity. So that's lovely, thank you.
I always think when you bring people from different backgrounds together and they have that opportunity to work together, to talk together. I'm sure you see it in the business school, different business backgrounds. When you've got your MBA students, they come in, and that's where the magic happens and the spark comes, because they actually, they're not just thinking and acting in the same way. And I think the really important thing is that we actually value everybody's ability to bring something to the table, and everybody then gets a seat at that table as well.
Absolutely.
So I think I'll just dive in because there are some great questions, as Jackie said, coming in. And so the first question that was posed from our friend Gordon Seabright, who's a friend to the business school and great links with Cornwall. So this perhaps question doesn't come as a surprise. So he says, given our excitement in Cornwall about bidding to become City of Culture in 2025, I wonder whether Darren has any thoughts about how the excellent work of Hull and Coventry could have been even better.
Well, I think, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, but as Gordon said, both Hull and Coventry, excellent. And I think, Coventry has done a particularly good job in really challenging times. I mean, to have done achieved what they've achieved with what was going on around us, extra credit to them. Hull, I declare my interest. I went to university in Hull. I absolutely love the place. And I think, that was a fantastic a year in 2017. I think the things I would observe, and I would say this for everybody it's actually a lot of the work is done during the application process, during that coming together, during that thing where you think, how are we going to define ourselves? What are we going to do? And you've got to keep holding on to that all the way through. I hope that you're successful. I hope everyone else is successful as well. I have no favourites in this, but I genuinely do. But actually, success will be a measure of what whoever wins, everyone else does as well. And so many examples. So Leicester is a great example of somewhere that's Leeds is a great example at the moment with the work they're doing around 2023 of saying, actually, we're just going to keep on going anyway. I'm in Sunderland next Friday. Again, wasn't successful in bidding for UK City of Culture in 21, but have put in place virtually everything that they said they were going to do. And I think that's really exciting. So for me, it's about the sense of possibility, and it's about getting on and doing stuff, but also just keeping those networks together, keeping talking, because that's where the really interesting things happen. And the narrative, I'm very interested in the narrative and the stories that places have, and you've got a very strong narrative in Cornwall.
Thanks. I can see Gordon nodding and thumbs up. Yeah, that was 3 top tips for Gordon there to take back to Cornwall. Thank you.
I'm going to go down in order here. So from Guy's interested to know how Darren looks after his own well-being and what role he spurted his tea out there, and what role culture plays in this.
It was coffee, and it's from my Shawadi Wadi mug, so I don't know what that says about me. But
think about tiger feet, or was that mud?
That was mud. So Pretty Little Angel Eyes is more Shawadi Wadi. I think I probably should be better at it, is the honest answer. But I think one of the things that I have found really useful is around things like mindfulness, actually, and using some of those techniques to give yourself some time. I think all the things that you need to do in having support networks and in talking to people, in being with people, even if it's virtually. And I mean, that was really interesting over the last year for all of us, where we've, I particularly, from the way I do my job, it's a very people focused job. I spend half of my time sort of traveling around the country, so I see a lot of people, I see a lot of work, and then suddenly I was sitting here in this room in my office at home for long periods of time. So that it is important, but I think actually the best thing, and for me the most restorative thing, is actually I do love my job. So having a job that you love, that you feel makes a difference, and where you can make a difference, I think probably is one of the best things. I think I'd find it very, very hard, and I've never had this. I've never had a job that I didn't love doing. I think I'd find it very hard if I hated my job.
You are a prolific learner, lifelong learner, Darren, aren't you? So that you've been doing various degrees alongside everything else and writing books. So that presumably is part of your well-being, is it?
Yeah, and I think it was interesting. So when over the last couple of years, thinking a lot about applied positive psychology, a big part of that is actually about strengths profiling and understanding. So it turns out that love of learning is my number one strength, and when you do the strengths profile, that comes up consistently, whichever one you do. I'm very pleased, although my team disagree with this strongly on me, but humour was very high as well, but though apparently my jokes aren't actually that good, so everyone who works for me tells me that's not the case.
So a question from Ruth, who says that you mentioned place and placemaking as part of the mix when you were talking about people, happiness and creativity, and she'd be interested to hear more about your thoughts on that, and particularly the role of cultural leaders within a place.
At the Arts Council, we've just identified 54 priority places right around the country that we're going to work very closely on over our next, as part of our Let's Create, our next 10-year strategy, which runs through until 2030. And I think for me, the ingredients in a place, I always talk a lot about investable propositions. We're always looking for investable propositions. In fact, I pinched this idea off Sir Richard Leese, who's just retired as leader of Manchester City Council, and he talked a lot about having propositions that were ready for investment, and I think that's really interesting. And so people in a place and having leaders in a place are there that support. It's interesting. Some of those will be very obvious. So chief executives and leaders, elected leaders of local authorities, really important. Strong business community is very, very important. Actually, I'm a huge fan of universities in places, and having a vice chancellor who gets culture and sees that role as a civic university is really, really important. And further education is becoming increasingly important as well, because actually we're seeing that greater emphasis on a skills agenda as well. So you've then got the artists and the arts organisations, and they could often be leaders in their places, quite often in ways that maybe not to do sometimes with their core business as well. And that's really interesting. They can bring people together, they can host things, they have physical spaces that people come into. All of those things are really, really important. And, and Kira, you know this from a library point of view as well. Libraries can often provide, because they have that very egalitarian, safe place in a place that is actually usually quite well situated in a high street or town centre. They can perform a role there where actually they can be quite welcoming to people who wouldn't go into other sorts of cultural institutions. So there's never one answer, and it's quite a sort of quite developed patchwork or tapestry, but it's really exciting. And I suppose when you see, as I say, a lot of time traveling around, I can very, very quickly see that the ingredients are in a place. And sometimes I go to places and I think they're not there yet, or they get there in eventually. But there's a moment you think, yes, this place has got it. Usually because they like each other. That's also one of the things that's really interesting. They know each other and like each other. I get a bit worried if I go to a place, they don't appear to have met everybody and they sort of snipe at different parts of it. That worries me. But you can very, very quickly tell when the opposite is true.
So true.
Making me think of the word soul, to be soulful. There's something very deep, very effervescent and intrinsic, isn't there, about this whole thing that you're talking about? We have a question here from Sue, and she's saying it's at a bit of a tangent, but I think it fits quite nicely actually. With the understandable emphasis there has been on STEM in education, do you think there is more that could be done now to encourage the study of the arts in schools as part of managing the well-being and our very future?
The short answer is yes. And I've always argued, I did, as Kira said in the introduction, I did more than 10 years ago a report for the government on cultural education. And I believe very, very strongly that all young people should have cultural education inside the classroom and outside the classroom as part of their education. I think that's how we educate rounded human beings. And I think for me, again, it's always reduced to a sort of binary question. It shouldn't be. We shouldn't be at 14 asking young people to choose what their entire life career is based on an option. There may be all sorts of reasons, and they get to 15 or 16, and their world has changed again, and it's kind of too late. And I think that I'm very interested in as I travel around the country, I stand a lot on train platforms, and a lot of those train platforms have adverts for independent schools on the walls, and it's really interesting how independent schools market themselves, and it is a market, and parents are prepared to invest considerable amounts of money in their young people to fund their education at independent schools. And when they market themselves, they don't talk about maths lessons or geography lessons. So you'll get something with somebody sitting in a classroom, but then they'll talk about the music, the art and design, the drama, and the sport. And that's actually that's what they're offering. So I'm really curious. That's what the market is asking for in education, where people are paying for it. And I think it's really interesting how that will give people a set of life skills and life experiences. It's really interesting. Prince George and Princess Charlotte, at the school they go to, when you're 3 years old, you get taught ballet, boys and girls, and also you're taught it by specialist teachers, and it's just what they do. They also market themselves on the art that they deliver, and languages as well, which is just interesting. They're the things they kind of pick out. If you, at various times, I haven't been on it recently, but certainly when I did go on it and had a look on Eton's website, they talk a lot about the creativity their students, and I think that's really interesting as well. And I think it's fascinating that statistically the people who end up running the country have had that sort of education. I think that sort of education should be open to absolutely everybody, and I think it's really, really important. And I think that, again, in tertiary education, when people are undergraduates, I think actually those places which can broaden them out from just their core subjects. I love the idea of all scientists having to go and do a liberal arts certificate alongside it, something like that. Maybe even just for one term, maybe just something, but just to get it into their headspace, just to show them the possibility. Because I think culture, arts subjects, and music and dance and drama and art and design and film studies, these are subjects that actually take you from beyond what you're used to in your everyday life. They show you another world, another universe that's out there, that's not just about the day-to-day life of whoever you are, wherever you are. And I think that's a very magical thing. The other thing I'm very passionate about right now at this time of year is pantomime. I think pantomime is one of the most important art forms that we actually invest in, because it actually can change people from a tougher socioeconomic background and bring them into the arts in one way. They tend to go with their schools. It's maybe the first time they went somewhere with a tippy up seat. They see live music and dancing and drama and comedy happening in a where they're with their friends, and there's a sense of community, and it's fun, and it makes theatres a safe space and an interesting place for them to go. And it can absolutely change their world. And so, it's really interesting. You talked early on about society. It's really interesting how, for all of the many art forms that suffered over the last 2 years, there was a lot of public comment about pantos last Christmas, and about were pantos going to happen or not. They're very important for theatres in terms of the finances, but they're actually important for places. That intergeneration, Granny will take the granddaughter, they'll go every year. There's all, I will probably see a dozen pantomimes this year in different parts of the country, and every one of them has its own sort of idiosyncratic thing, their particular catchphrase or song that everyone else in the auditorium knows because they've been coming for years. It's fantastic. And I think those sorts of things are part of the glue of our places and of our everyday lives.
You've just taken me back, Darren, to 1975 and the Theatre Royal in Norwich, and seeing, one year seeing Richard Briers, and the other year seeing Benny from Crossroads. So that dates me, doesn't it? But you've brilliantly anticipated the next question actually from Tim, which is a long one, but a very important one, I think. So bear with me as I just read it out, because it does really build on the previous question. So he says, the pandemic and sudden move to easy availability of open online conversations and educational events has provided tremendous opportunity for the two cultures to collaborate in all sorts of important ways that were difficult to make time for pre-pandemic. How can we now irreversibly embed arts and sciences in an indivisible collaborative relationship and prevent the fragmentation of social discourse and values that we've seen accelerated by social media echo chambers?
Yeah, I think it's, anything that we can do to bring people from different backgrounds together. And it's really interesting. Tim makes it's a really interesting question, because scientists have so much to learn from artists, and artists have so much to learn from scientists. There's a guy called, and I write about him in the book actually, called Roger Kneebone, who is at Imperial College, and he also has spent some time at the Royal College of Music as well. And he is a medic by trade, but he actually does a lot of medical education, and he's very curious about what science and art can learn from each other. So, for example, when you're a heart surgeon, I didn't know this, but when you're a heart surgeon and you sew people up, the needle you use is curved. The other people who do that are crocheters. So he's brought the best of the country's crocheters together with the surgeons to work out how they can become better at sewing. If you are an orthopedic surgeon, it's a very physical job you do. You're literally sawing people. It's apparently very, very physical, very long operations that they deliver. They would do all the things about scrubbing and bacterial infection and all that sort of stuff, but they didn't do anything about their upper body strength. So the other people who do that are puppeteers. So he's brought puppeteers in to work with orthopedic surgeons to help them develop better upper body strength, so they stay in better condition doing all these operations. And the third example, which I love, is when you go and see your GP, if you're able to go and see them in real life, you get 6 minutes with them. That's basically what they work on the basis of. In that 6 minutes, they've got to build some sort of rapport and relationship with you, find out what's wrong with you, and prescribe something or work out what they're going to do to help you get better. Rapport is absolutely key in that. The people who are really, really good at that are close-up table magicians. So he's brought close-up table magicians in to work with GPs to help them develop their rapport. And I just think that's a fantastic way of actually saying, here's a group of artists, a group of creative people, all of whom have got amazing skills that actually are relevant to pure medical science. And I think that's really interesting. And it works back the other way. He's done a lot of training for war surgeons. So surgeons working in very tough war situations, which are very hard to actually train for, because until you're in that environment. So what he actually does is he uses immersive theatre technology, and he will use light and sound to train them. So basically, he can get to a position where he can tell them that they are in the middle of a battlefield, and these are the things they're going to have to do, and they can learn on that basis. So again, another really fascinating way where the two things come together. So I think all of those sorts of people who bring that world together. He's written an excellent book called Experts, all about experts, which is really, really good. But you can bring those people together and not seeing things as being in silos, and actually being just respectful and learning from each other. Let's not worry too much about the labels and things like that. Let's actually think about what the output is, and what the difference that we can make.
Wow. Well, I'm going to ask my final question from the audience, and then I'll pass to Kira for hers. But again, staying on this theme, because one of the things we purposefully did with this talk was bring the world of business together with the world of arts, and we see that as very important. This question comes from Nick Parker, who's the sculpture lead at Stone Lane Gardens here in Devon. And he was saying that non-arts organisations need more creatives to facilitate innovation, but many of those organisations don't realise it. What is the Arts Council doing, or might it do, to stimulate dialogue and understanding, I guess, between the two worlds?
Well, I think it's a very good point, and I think that the place-based strategy is actually a very, very good way of doing this, because we start with a place and then come out from that. So rather than starting with an art form or a business, we actually start to try to bring people together. And I think that's really interesting. The other thing I think that's very important, and for all organisations, the quality of their governance is really, really important. And actually getting more business people involved with arts organisations and getting more artists involved with business organisations, sitting on boards, that's really, really important. I talk a lot about one of the things, I think, people sometimes ask me the question around what could we do around getting more arts and culture within schools. You touched on this earlier. The single biggest thing is that everybody who's an artist or works for an arts organisation could become a school governor. We could change the world by stealth by that, because school governors are the people that set the agendas within their schools. They hire the head teacher. They ask the questions, and so that's something that's really, really simple. It doesn't cost any money. It's something that everybody could do who cares about the future of young people, future of creativity in this country, is just to become a school governor. So I think it's actually getting into spaces where we're bringing people together. There's a very good book. I can't remember the author. It's called something like The Techies and the Fuzzies, and it's about looking at sort of the internet world over in California, and it's really interesting. So you do need techies. You need those people who've got that technical knowledge and skill, PhD. They hire a lot of them, but they're always really interested to hire what they call the fuzzies, which are the humanitarians, creative and performance side of things, and they are humanities is the word I was looking for, not humanitarian. The humanities is the word I was looking for, and they are really, really important. Actually, they're the ones that are the change agents within there, supporting the people with the technical knowledge. And again, it's not either or. It's not binary. You need both, and I think that's really, really important.
So I'm going to indulge myself in the last question, and we haven't done this with any of our other leading edge speakers this series, but as we are running up to the festive season, Darren, and you've already given a plug for pantomime, and what would be lovely is to hear your recommendations for books you think we should be reading over our Christmas break, films we should be seeing, theatre we should be watching. What's, here we are with the Chief Executive Arts Council. I can't let this moment go without you giving us some of your recommendations of things we should be consuming over Christmas.
Well, I'd really encourage you to go and buy a ticket to see something in your local place, wherever you live. I think go and support something. Those professional creative people, whether it be musicians or theatres or in galleries, they really need your patronage and they want to build that relationship. And when you go there, sign up, get on the database so that they can keep talking to you, so they can build a meaningful relationship with you over time. In terms of I would say this, but I am quite obsessed with pantomime at this time of year. And if you've got young children in your family, get them into the panto habit. Start a family tradition with pantomime. Make sure you take Granny and Granddad along too. It's the most amazing thing, and it is brilliant. And it's a very pantomime is a very British thing. It's part of our culture, it's part of our heritage, but actually it's a really important part of our high streets as well. So I would say, get out there, go and see as much. Do it safely. You'll find that most theatres now, all theatres now, are taking your safety and the safety of the performers really, really seriously. So I know I'd say wrap up warm, because you'll find that many of them have got their aircon on at full blast and it's quite chilly, but they're doing all those sorts of things. You can find there are special shows that are social distancing involved. So and they're also for all sorts of communities. You'll find a lot of relaxed shows as well. So if you've got someone in your family that would struggle going to somewhere with loud lights and bangs, you'll find those sorts of performances happening too. But I would say get back out there. It makes a huge difference. When you go there, buy your pint, eat your food there, go and support our cultural industries. They really need it, and actually you'll get something out of it, because it's the best thing to do. Because we didn't have it quite a lot the last 2 years. We missed it, and we want to have it for the rest of our lives.
Brilliant. Thank you, Darren. And thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. It's been really fascinating kind of exploration of lots of different issues, and lots for us to pick up on the conversation afterwards. But thank you very much for joining us and being our last speaker in our Leading Edge series. Were you going to say?
I was just going to say thank you both very much, and just to say to everybody, I hope you have a good break at the end of the year, and please do keep taking good care of yourself.
Thank you. And so we always give a plug to the books that we feature on Leading Edge. So as ever, you can get this from all reputable independent bookshops, libraries, etc. So do check out Darren's thoughts, because it's really worth a read over Christmas. So that just leads us really to say thank you to all of you for joining us, not just this afternoon, but many of you have joined us all through this series. It's been great. It's one of the best things that I do during the year is to co-host this series with Jackie. So I just want to say thank you to all of you for doing that.